I have a ton of questions I want to ask you. You want to? Do you feel like it's kind of cold, or you want to jam for like 5, 10 more
No,
minutes?
no, no. I'm here to talk. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, ask away.
Okay,
Ask
so
away.
here's the newest thing I've been geeking out about, right? We talk a lot about different tensional configurations and this idea of there being an optimal tensional configuration. And you know me, I have a lot of, I like to ask questions. So I'm always looking at it from like a questioning perspective. And what I've been recently considering is the possibility of, and this was something that was kind of starting to form when we were talking of it earlier, of different tensional configurations having different optimized outputs. And the easiest way I can try to explain this to somebody who might not understand it is like when you're fighting Muay Thai, you hold yourself in a certain way, you tension yourself in a certain way, which I think is very related to kind of a lot of the stuff that you're teaching me with the TVA, the expansion, the upright tallness, which allows for really good force transfer between your upper and lower extremities. But then there's also like how wrestlers and grapplers stand. There's like a little bit more posterior chain dominant, a little bit more sinking back, a little bit more right here. And I've like been playing around a lot because this is what the Goto Loco people do. They're really big on like back chain dominance, posterior chain dominance, being a lot back here. And that to me seems distinct from like the anchoring here. And although you can combine them together, it seems like there are these different configurations that you can almost snap in and out of that have different applications.
So it sounds like you're saying like almost archetypes. Like there's the archetype for like, would you say is another word for what you're describing? Like there's base, like there's islands of perfect positioning depending on the area of the ocean you're in. Does that make?
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, it's almost like different positionings for straight sprinting versus if you're like juking people, you know? Like feels like those two tensionings are somewhat different.
So and you're saying you're saying is there, let's say for each sport, is there a sport specific ideal position versus one ideal position that applies to all sports?
I wouldn't say sport specific because one sport might have various different movements within it. Like football, maybe you're throwing, right? The guy who's throwing the ball, like that's more of that TVA torso engagement. Whereas like the guy who's about to duck down and take a hit, like he's more like coil tension and like braced here. So I would say just different tensional configurations for different movement applications.
Okay, what are you asking me? Or are you guys asking me my thoughts about that?
Yeah, this is just what I've been thinking about lately because it does feel like I can snap into these different, like, for example, another one would be like when it comes to the foot, this hyperarch tensioning, which is a like balancing between flexion and extension that creates the springiness. And then there's also like walking on the inside ankle bone high to get the dots. And it's like these are two, I like the idea of islands. It's like different referential points that can be combined in interesting ways, but it's almost like one has to hold the top position and be built around. That makes sense? Am I coming?
Yes. Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, there are certain foundational tensions that you're going to find in any movement, any sport, any position, right? There are times when you want your TVA to be sucked in and the belly to be very compressed and the expansion is in the chest cavity and you're decompressed and you're here. And that's you want that anytime you're rotating, right? But like the moment if you're gonna bend down to pick something, to pick up something heavy, you don't want your stomach to be all empty. Well, you don't want your stomach to be compressed and vacuumed in. You want to have positive pressure in the belly. You want to be able to like
Positive pressure belly or in the torso?
In the belly. You want to be able to compress. So if you're rotating, you want to compress the stomach and expand the ribs.
Okay.
If you're about to pick up something heavy and bend over in the sagittal plane, you want to compress the ribs and force all that pressure into the belly to compress your lower back. Think about a heavy squat. Think about a heavy squat, right? You want to have that. You want to have your belly be like a tire that has.
Man, it's fucking brilliant, guys. I don't think you're grasping how fucking. See, I didn't think about that, man. I didn't think about switching the tensioning from the upper to the lower and how that would make you like more core dominant and more like spinal supported. So yeah, that's fascinating. Sorry to interrupt. Please continue. I'm just like.
So that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in my course. There's going to be a whole section on breathing. So there are muscles that expand the ribs, and there are muscles that compress the ribs, right? So I work with clients, and you will see you can have 20 people, you lay them all on the ground face up, and you say, start breathing. You will see some, and I need to actually get percentages, but some is in and out as they're breathing naturally, right? But other people, it'll be the ribs going in and out naturally. And typically, they struggle to do the opposite. So people that just naturally have their ribs rising and falling when they breathe, you say, okay, stop your ribs from moving and have your belly go in and out. It's hard. They don't have the awareness. They don't have the strength. But there are muscles that expand the ribs and muscles that compress the ribs. Some people are strong in the muscles that expand the ribs, and that means it's easy for their ribs to expand. But for you to send force into your stomach, you have to compress the ribs. That's its own strength. And some people lack that. And that's something I lacked for a while because I was so focused on get as big as I can. I lost the opposite end of that spectrum. So you need to have both. I mean, tensegrity to me really, and my training, and tensegrity training, all that, you're just caught. What is it you cannot do? Right? What is it you cannot do? Let's get you better at that. What part of which chain is not good at sending force? What direction are you good at sending force from head to toe but not toe to head? You're just constantly finding the weakest. With my own training and the training of my clients, I'm constantly trying to find the things that are worst at and focusing all my attention on that.
Okay, so many directions my mind is going in. It's like trying not to interrupt every 3 words. I'm going to pick one and just follow that a little bit more. So let's talk about like pelvic tilt, for example, which I think is like, that's a fucking big center point. I am under the impression that this ideal postural orientation that we hypothesize about has a neutrally tucked pelvis. Is that's correct?
So, well, typically when I think of tuck, I think of a posterior tilt. Now, if someone's stuck in anterior tilt and they miss tuck to get to neutral, but at that point I would just say they have a neutral pelvis. Yes. Not a neutrally tucked, because then you're still, at that point you may need a tuck to get to neutral, at which point I would say they have a neutral pelvis, yes.
So then I look at like how babies walk and how that posterior chain dominance is, and it's like, it's a little bit of the butt sticking out almost to really get that back chain dominance going on. So why do we want the hips to be tucked under us if, like, as babies we have that anterior pelvic tilt, and a lot of athletes have that anterior pelvic tilt? Why is it that can you kind of see what I'm getting at there?
Yeah. So first, what do you think is a possible negative result of tucking?
I think that it could, well, I'd say, okay, beneficially first, how I look at it is like why I try to get the hips to neutral is because I want to decompress the lower vertebrae of the spine, which tends to be an area where people get a lot of compression when they are excessively anterior tilted. So I would say what could be a potential benefit of keeping it tucked is that I don't feel the same back chain tensioning as I do in connection to my glutes. I lose connection to my glutes in a sense, than if I'm like kind of sticking the hips back and sinking into it. So I'd say glute connection and back chain dominance
is a benefit of
is a detriment of this neutral hip tuck.
Got it. So you're saying that whenever you put your pelvis, whenever you tuck your pelvis and give yourself like, let's say, a straight spine, and your pelvis goes neutral, you feel like you lose glute tension.
Yeah, I would say that if I would say it a little different. I would say if I'm trying to find glute tension in this back chain dominance, a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt is like what locks me into it. Whereas if I try to keep the hips tucked to neutral, it doesn't tension in the same way.
So you're saying in a bent over context, when you're bent over, like hinging at the hips?
Right. I guess it is somewhat bent, but like even just like kind of. So they have this position in Go to Loco. They say don't lose your dinosaur, and it's like very like Velociraptor scaps, hips back, and like pressing into the glutes, and then kind of tensioning the legs. And it's like this sort of movement here. And I find that I feel this whole posterior chain when I kind of lock into that in a way that, like, I do have to have some degree of hinge, because if I try to come up all the way, at that point I do want to tuck to neutral, right? Like as I start to hinge, I like want it, but then you see babies and they're like walking around with this naturally. Like they're always slightly hinged when they're moving. They're never walking around like this, right?
Well, first I would say we'd have to, at first I would have to push back a little bit on that, because we don't see all babies, and babies have all kinds of walks and all kinds of, and it depends on their stage of development. So there's that. Then, so what I'm really seeing when I see what you've just done and you're saying the dinosaur, I just see you shifting your center of gravity back behind your heels, and you're basically loading the posterior chain. But what you're saying is that as you shift the butt back, you kind of need to have a bit of an anterior tilt to feel your glutes. And if you tuck your butt to where the spine is straight, and I can't tell because your shirt is on, but I'm assuming that that's what's happening, is that once you tuck your glutes, tuck your pelvis, the glutes turn off. So when I say muscle, so muscles can, going back to when I said some muscles work and don't work, muscles can be great at a certain range and then just not, and then turn off at another range. And the fibers themselves, the actin and myosin heads, have not, and I don't know exactly how that works because that's kind of very in-depth, but you'll see that lots of people have muscles that will work at a certain range, but once that range changes, and usually it's as it gets shorter, it depends, shorter or longer, actually, it goes both ways, it'll turn off. And so with you, I would say, you may need to find, here's another thing. Muscles have strengths at different ranges of motion. When a muscle is not strong enough, it will turn off and your body will just go to something else. And so when you tuck your pelvis, your glutes may not be used to that, and they may not be strong enough in that position to engage. I can feel my glutes whether I'm in full anterior or full posterior. It doesn't matter where my hips are. I can feel them usually. But that may just be a thing where your glutes turn off because they're not strong enough, and so your body defaults to the hamstrings or something else. And that is, part of what I do with clients, and what I think is important to be done is find where what muscles do you have that have certain ranges of motion that they just turn off.
Do you think looking at the way that babies move is something that is worth modeling after?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's certain things that are yeah, I'd say yes. I wouldn't say modeling. I would say it's worth looking at certain things babies do to see certain mechanisms of the body, to see like what the body looks like before, babies start to imitate parents, or, I think there's lots to learn by looking at babies, yes.
Yeah, I've been doing it lately. I've been looking at babies move, like nerd that I am. And that little back press of the hips, like back here, is something that I like. They tend to move like this more than they move like
Well,
this, you know?
I think there's a reason that you're not going to find any culture or try, because you have to understand, like, babies have not been. When you see a baby walking, by definition, that is a creature that has not been walking for very long. Okay, they are in the process of going from a creature that has been crawling to a creature that has been walking. So you cannot call them a master of walking, right? You cannot say that they have this beautiful walk. They're learning to walk. They're in the process of walking. They have been crawling. They've been in hip flexion. They've been, anytime they get anywhere, they're crawling. They've been in hip flexion. So in the process of them going from crawling, which is hip flexion, to walking, which requires, and I would say the proper walking does, being fully straight up and down, you're going to have to go through that range. And so that is probably what you see, is babies going through the process of slowly getting their hips to be fully tucked to neutral and then shifted to where they're straight up and down.
That's a really fascinating thought and a really good way of putting it. And I could be completely wrong about this, but I wonder how much pelvic tilt babies have when they crawl. I wonder if that is like, following the same train of thought that you're having.
I would say that they have
anterior tilt when they crawl.
I would guess they have no pelvic tilt.
Right. So why, when they start standing, would the pelvic tilt come into play unless it was already in the pattern with the crawling?
So when they're crawling, the spine, you got the spine, and then let's say my little fingernail, that's the sacrum. And hold on.
He's about to break it down for us one time, y'all. It's going down.
Okay, spine and sacrum. There we go. Okay, so here's the sacrum. It doesn't. The sacrum.
That's his keychain, by the way, y'all.
Yes, yeah. So here's the spine and the hips. Okay, just so y'all have the full view of the hips. Here we go. So the baby's crawling. There was a floss stick on the. There was a floss stick on the ground, which is the bane of my girlfriend's existence. Okay, so they're crawling. The baby. This is the baby's femur, right? Obviously, it's the femur, and then the leg is here, right? Boom. You see what I'm saying there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the leg's like that. Okay, so the baby's crawling, right? And they're used to being, the femur stays in this range, right? Well, for them to stand, they need to get all the way here, okay? So the tilt is not in relation to the spine. The tilt and the hip and spine stay in the same angle. The tilt is in relation to the femur. So they start standing, for a while they're here, because they're still learning how to shorten the hamstrings, probably mostly in the glutes, and maybe the adductor magnus to a degree, probably, and some of the adductors maybe. But as that shortens up, they're from here to here. They're tucking the pelvis. It's just that it's tucking in relation to the femur, not the spine.
Makes total sense to me. Yeah, dude, really good answer, man. As you people can see, this man has thought about this shit. And I love fucking picking your brain on this stuff, man. I think 10 minutes is about where this cuts off if we try to repost it. So, Gina, appreciate you. We're getting a lot of love from people watching. Let's end this here. I'll chop it up. I'll send it to you. And let's do this again soon, man.
Can't wait, man. Looking forward to it. Thanks for taking the time.
This man's course. Peace, brother.
See you guys.